Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall. While he's best professionally known for roles like Sideshow Bob and the X-Men's Dr. Hank McCoy, and of course Frasier Crane, actor Kelsey Grammer has also launched a beer brand. It's called Faith American Ales, and it's available in New York and New Jersey. He's my guest on the show this week. And we'll get into it all in a moment, but first, please visit allaboutbeer.com for original articles, reviews, news, insight, and other podcasts. You can listen to shows like Beer Travelers, Brewer to Brewer, and the All About Beer podcast by simply searching All About Beer where you listen to shows. This show and all of the work we do is supported by you. You can visit patreon.com/allaboutbeer to help keep the content fresh. And if you'd like to learn more about advertising on this show, please email info@allaboutbeer.com. Speaking of that, are you thinking about cutting back on alcohol this January? If so, check out Athletic Brewing Company, America's leading non-alcoholic craft brewer. Athletic makes a wide selection of near beers, including IPAs, Goldens, Darks, light brews, and more. Give dry a try this month with Athletic. And new Athletic customers can receive 20% off of their first order of 2 6-packs or more when they visit athleticbrewing.com and use the code AAB20 at checkout by March 31st, 2023. Thanks to Athletic for sponsoring this episode. Like many of you, I grew up with Kelsey Grammer on my TV set and on the screen. Through his roles on Cheers and Frasier as the voice of Sideshow Bob on The Simpsons and Stinky Pete in Toy Story 2, on the screen with roles in Down Periscope and the early iterations of the X-Men. He's done a lot with his professional life, including countless stage shows, he's authored books, he's dabbled in music. And I was intrigued when a few years back I heard that he had started a beer company. It's called Faith American, and it's based out of upstate New York, where he owns a home. The brand was started in 2019, but was quickly put on pause as the start of COVID-19 shut down, well, pretty much everything. But it's been recently revived. The property that he hopes to one day open a tap room comes up a lot in our conversation as the thrust behind the beer ideas. But for now, those beers, the ales, are being made at Frog Alley, a Schenectady, New York brewery helmed by brewer Rich Michaels. The 3 beers in the Faith American lineup, which are 2 IPAs and an ale, currently have distribution throughout New York and New Jersey. As you'll hear, he's supporting the beer through appearances, often at local bars, the kind of cozy places where regulars have their reserved seats, the kind of bars where, well, you know. And that's how the show came together. Grammer, who was born in the Virgin Islands and grew up in New Jersey and Florida, was in my town doing one such event at my local. A few calls were made, and a day later I found myself at a hotel bar not far from my town, meeting Grammer in person. Beer and celebrity is interesting, and there's been a lot of well-known and bold-faced names that have gotten into the alcohol business. George Clooney selling tequila, Ryan Reynolds selling gin. There are celebrities who have vineyards, some in name only, and others who actually work the land. But there hasn't been too much in the way of beer. There are some examples, but it's largely been barren on the celebrity-supported and owner front. Grammer, as you'll hear, is all in, and he's added personal touches to the brand that bring more to the beers than just his extensive acting resume. Here's our conversation. Do you remember your first beer?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, it's not super specific because I think I was allowed to taste beer when I was pretty young.
Okay.
There wasn't a real big separation between my family and me as a child. I was allowed to try just about anything, and that they always, I think, were of the school that if it was at home and
sure,
they were supervised, it was better than going out and hiding it. But my grandmother, once I was 16, she would say, "Grab a beer for the road."
You were in Florida at the time.
Yeah, I was.
I think that's still the case down there.
Sort of the way it was. Yeah. I remember one time getting pulled over by a couple of cops. I was flying along. I was coming down from Lake Okeechobee. I had met a girl I thought was just hung the moon. She was fantastic. So I'd driven out there and kind of surprised her. I think I surprised her so much that she actually didn't really tell me, but I think she had a boyfriend around there, and
ducking out the back window.
We had a wonderful visit. We kissed and stuff, and we took a ride on her horse, and we swam across Lake Okeechobee, hanging onto the horse's tail while the horse swam. I mean, it was extraordinarily romantic and lovely.
Okay.
But I was, all my clothes were wet after that, of course. So, and she said, well, I'm afraid you're going to have to head home tonight. I can't really, have you stay over.
Sure.
Maybe it was just your dad. I don't really know.
Yeah.
It just seemed like there was a little bit of ice between us, but not entirely off-putting. However, I said, listen, may I just borrow a pair of shorts? And she said, sure, but she was really skinny.
Okay.
So I couldn't close them. And they were really short shorts. So I get pulled over by these cops. And I think,
in Florida.
Oh, this is great. And I'm not wearing a shirt, and I've got this really teensy-weensy set of shorts on, and I thought, oh, this is not going to look good at all. But I forgot that in the back of my car was probably about 3 months of grab a beer for the road. So there was like 90 beer cans in the back of the Maverick, and I had surf racks and stuff like that, and I thought, I'm just dead. But you know what? I said, oh yeah, those are, my dad loves to drink a beer on the road, and he always grabs one and just tosses them back there. And I thought my dad had been dead for a couple of years already anyway. But it went over fine, and they said, I'll tell you what, just get home safe, son. I said, yes, sir. Yes, sir, I certainly will. And that was the end of that.
Yeah, the high blood pressure the whole way home.
Right.
The fast pulse. Do you remember what your grandmother's beer of choice was?
Back then, we were drinking Busch.
Okay.
Yeah, Busch beer.
Which is still around.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It was fine. That was great swell for, the teens and for us as young adults.
Yeah.
I remember drinking, I worked demolition for a while when I was 18. And they always had like a nice chest filled with some long neck buds, really cold, so that all that dust that would come up because you were knocking down walls all the time.
Yeah.
That really cut through it beautifully, and that is the memory I have of what a beer I think should do, in terms of quenching your thirst. And it's. I think a bit of the ale that we designed it has that kind of sort of sense memory in it. Like I want it to be refreshing and have a little bit of bite in it. And of course, in our beer, there's a bit more distinguishable hop and stuff like that gives it a bit more complexity.
Yeah.
But the experience that I want and that I'm trying to sort of repeat for people is that, God, that tastes good. And just, wow. So,
yeah. And I certainly want to talk about the brand, and I want to kind of ease into that because there's so much that's going on with beer these days, and I'm curious as to where the brand fits in. You mentioned your dad, and in my research beforehand, he owned a bar and a coffee shop on the Virgin Islands.
Virgin Islands.
Yeah. Do you know much about that bar?
No. I have one picture of me when I was about a year old, I guess, kind of hanging out the Dutch door, walking into the bar and grill.
Yeah.
That was it. That's all I know.
Is your beer the type that you'd hope would be served there?
Gosh, never really thought about it. I always see that as more of a sort of Cuba Libre place.
Okay.
in my imaginings.
Okay, not so much West Coast IPA or blonde ale.
Nobody was really talking about that then.
Or things like that. But it's a theme, I guess, in some ways, of family situation, owning a bar. You're known acting-wise for bar settings and all of that. And you're spending with this brand a lot of time tending bar, going to neighborhood bars. I'm just wondering if there is some sort of connection to the past.
Gosh, I don't know.
Through all of that.
That's a pretty good thing, pretty good question. But what I have discovered about myself, well, I've known this about myself for a long time before I even thought about brewing a beer, was I like bars. I love them. I love the people I meet there. I love the occasion of a bar. I love hanging around, camaraderie, sometimes flirtation, that kind of thing. I mean, some of the best people I've ever met in my life was sitting next to them on a bar stool.
Yeah.
And so I celebrate the idea of being in a bar. And what I've tried to do since we started with the beer was just to say, hey, come have a beer, because it's just a fun experience, and I think it's a great way for people to relate to one another without getting messed up.
not to drive this through a cactus patch, but there are well-documented interviews that you've given about alcohol in the past.
Oh, yeah.
Going through AA, going through the 12 steps. And then I saw an interview that you did where you now call yourself a reformed drinker. And
I never keep track of these things, but thankfully you do.
Well, Google's helpful with 24 hours notice on these things. But the beer industry in general is wrestling with moderation, is talking about mental health, is talking about addiction, and talking about, making sure that you can enjoy but also don't go off the deep end
with limitation. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, you always want to advise people to, not be cautious, but be intelligent. I mean, I've always said to my friends, the only time you ever really get in trouble in your life is when you stop thinking, and if you've done too much drinking, odds are you may have stopped thinking.
Yeah,
and it relates to almost everything. Choices in terms of marriage, choices in terms of driving. Any number of those things. When you tend to get in trouble is when you've stopped thinking. And so getting behind the wheel of a car when you're a little loaded is not a great idea.
No, it's not at all. Yeah.
I once had a DUI with, it was a very funny experience. I was at home and my girlfriend and I got in a fight and she said, I want you to drive me home. And I said, I really can't. I can't drive you home because I've had too much to drink and I'm just not going to do it. So we went through several debates about it for about the next hour, yelling and screaming, and I finally said, fine, I'll take you home. Sure enough, I get pulled over. I'm not driving crazy, but I think my license was a little bit, my tag was maybe, the registration was close to over, or maybe it was past something.
Yeah.
So we got pulled over, and as the cop comes to the car window and I roll it down, my girlfriend starts screaming, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I thought, well, that's just not going to do well at all, is it?
No.
And the cop said, "What's her problem?" Then the next line was, "You want to step out of the car, sir?" Yeah. Oh, great.
Answer the first question, maybe not do the second.
So there I was. I was thinking really well as long as I was saying, "No, I'm not taking you." And then the moment I said, "Okay, fine," that's when I stopped.
You're obviously doing this now. Is this poking the bear, or do you feel like you're at a different point now in your life?
Well, okay. I mean, I'm willing to answer this question. A really great guy I knew who was a pretty serious drinker. Somebody was a little more professional at it than I was.
Okay.
Said alcoholism is unresolved grief. And I thought, boy, that's pretty interesting, and I think there may be something to that.
Yeah.
And I certainly was carrying a lot of grief around with me. Some I still carry, but not unresolved. And things did change in my life. So, I mean, yeah, I enjoy a cocktail. When I did go to what I like to call Cocktail Academy, I met a guy who actually said, I always admire people who can still enjoy their drug of choice. I thought, well, that's kind of what I'd like to aim for, because I actually like to sit down and have a cocktail with somebody. I love to have martinis, that kind of thing. And the beer world never really entered my mind until I was living on this property that I own in upstate New York, and that inspired me to try beer. That was the whole thing.
What was it about the property?
Well, historically, it's in a region that was more populated during the Revolutionary War than it is now. Some people say that they used to grow hops there. I'm not sure how successful that must have been.
Upstate New York, pre-Prohibition, certainly.
Yeah. And they say that some of the older recipes and stuff, like from the Revolutionary War, stuff like that, maybe the hops came from around where we lived. Of course, when I studied the idea of launching the project on the land there, the guys from Cornell came down and said, "There's no place here you can grow any hops."
But they would know.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
It's because for some reason I live in a little microclimate that is really cold, colder than most around it, and when it's 0, 30 miles away, it's actually negative 17 where we are.
Jesus.
So it can be a nasty winter there. So I abandoned the idea that I was going to actually grow any hops there.
Sure.
I did.
Was that the original plan?
Yeah, right. Was to sort of like source it from my own property, stuff like that, get the water off my own property, all sorts of things like that was the original image. I had this great sort of retired dairy farm there that I owned, and the barn was absolutely beautiful. It looks like an old Viking ship turned upside down. It's absolutely beautiful, the roof line and everything. And it's 100 yards long. It used to be a pretty substantial.
I was going to say that's
farm.
a lot of cows.
Yeah. And that seemed ideal. And then, of course, I found out I wasn't allowed to use the water because it's not my water. Unlike everywhere else in New York State, it belongs to New York City.
Oh, you're on the aquifer.
Yeah.
Okay.
So sort of like, oh, here we go.
So for commercial purposes, then it becomes
it's theirs. Yeah.
But you said beer hadn't entered your mind though. But what was it about that barn that said because New York?
Because I didn't want to milk
upstate.
cows twice a day.
Yeah.
I thought beer's good.
Okay.
Because I knew the water was pretty significant.
Okay.
And the water bubbles out of the ground. I live very much at the very top of the hills of the Catskill Mountains, and there is no pollution there where I am, unless it's acid rain, which may be coming from some industrial part. But it doesn't tend to go that way.
Well, if it did, it would freeze at minus 17.
It's really clear.
So
But there's always water coming out of the ground, which is magnificent water, and that's what first guided my instinct to say, let's give this a try.
I feel like those are fun ideas to say, okay, sure, we're going to open up a brewery, we're going to do some stuff. You followed through, though.
Yeah, that's the kind of guy I am.
It's
it's like
the kind of hairpin you are.
The kind of hairpin I am. Yeah, there you go.
We found out a way to work in Jack Benny. Good for you. In what way? I mean, what?
Well, when I decided, something might be worth my time, I just figure it's worth a good dose of it, and as much as I can muster to do a good job of it. And I spoke to a couple of guys I knew who were in the beer business, and had a buddy come out and take a look at the property, and he was like, "Oh yeah, this would be great. What do you want to do? You want to do a beer factory here?" I said, "Yeah, I want to do a beer factory here. That's exactly what I want to do." So we went out and bought a big old brew house, which I still haven't used. Because it's once they told me I couldn't use the water, I abandoned any sense of trying to do it there. I was going to have to build a water treatment plant that was going to be on the lower 40, just below where the brewery was going to be.
Yeah.
And it was a multi-million-dollar build just to take care of the effluents. And I thought, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
I mean, the beer business barely makes sense anyway, because it's a very sort of small margin business, and we're not past the sort of midway point yet. We're sort of it's some income, but we're not profitable yet. But it's okay. That's what we're gonna be.
So the idea for a brewery came from the location, from the water,
absolutely, from the land and everything else, and the experience that I've had there. And I grew up going up to this part of America during Thanksgiving always with my granddad, and that was a big selling point for me to suddenly think, let's do something profitable with the land, which would turn into a kind of former glory kind of thing. Because it was really an abundant place before, prosperous. It had been a cauliflower farm as well as a dairy farm. Most of the locals who live there will come up and say, "Oh yeah, I used to pack cauliflower up on that property when I was in high school," stuff like that. It's still a pretty countrified place.
So when you said, "Okay, we're going to go forward with this anyway. We're not going to put it in the brew house, but we're going to contract out. We're going to create a brand." What was the thought process to get us to Faith American?
Well, I wanted to have an ale because I knew that it took a little less time in the fermenters.
Yep.
And I thought, let's go with the easiest, drinkable, because the notion was always I wanted to have an ale that walked and talked a bit more like a lager, and but had a little bit of a hoppy finish. And so that was sort of the
that old school refreshment that you were talking about earlier.
That's exactly what I was heading for. And I found a guy with a recipe, and we talked about it, and did a couple of batches before I liked it. Tweaked it, cooked it a little less, made a little more bite in it, and I love the beer. So once I loved it, then we started making it, and we got our first sort of pressing out in Las Vegas. Actually, people were really interested in the beer. We went with Southern Wine and Liquors, and they said, "Okay, we're going to put it on the table at this charity event we're going to do. Neil Diamond came and sang, and there was a can of Faith on every table, and I thought, yeah, we've arrived. The next week, they canceled March Madness in Vegas because of COVID.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, we're going to just pull back. We're not really, we can't get damaged.
You weren't at that point.
No, we can't get damaged by it. You know,
Yeah.
we just haven't really entered the market. So we pulled back. We didn't brew for a little while, and then I commissioned the guys that I was working with outside of Albany to do a new batch. Several months later, I developed another beer at the same time. That's when I developed Calico Man, the IPA that I have.
Yeah.
And then the beer that they made that time was terrible.
Really?
And I thought, what have you done? What happened?
I can't imagine Rich Michael's making a bad beer.
Yeah, well, it wasn't Rich.
Okay.
This was before I got to Rich.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rich improved that batch.
Gotcha.
I mean, well, I got rid of that batch.
Sure.
What had happened was we tracked down the fact that they had been using old yeast. It tasted metallic, had a metallic aftertaste, and I thought, I'm not going to sell that to anybody. I wouldn't ask anybody to drink that beer. One of the guys was like, "Are you shitting me? This beer tastes just like blah blah blah." He named like 5 or 6 beers. I said, "Yeah, but I don't like any of those."
Okay.
So, okay, that's not the beer I want to sell. So we that's when Rich and I sat down and said, "Why don't we try this, try that?" And we did another couple of batches where I was not crazy about what we went for, and then I dialed it in a little bit more, and he came up with this wonderful beer that I'm really happy with, and we've stayed there.
That's Calico Man.
No, that's actually the first one, the ale.
Oh, the ale.
Yeah,
Okay.
Just it's just a Belgian style ale, golden, whatever, blonde ale or whatever they call it. And then we developed the Calico Man together.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was I said, well, this is what I'm going to go for. A little less piney. I don't, I'm not an IPA lover. So I said I want a drinkable IPA. I want to make beer always that tastes like beer, and that's kind of one of the major caveats of the whole thing. But I've grown a little more fond of the IPA idea. I just don't like it to taste like kerosene.
What?
Which is where I think half of it is.
What does that mean? Grown fonder of the IPA idea?
Well, it's just I like this. I like the notes. I like the fragrance. I like the additional kind of flavor complexity. So I'm for that, as long as it doesn't taste like kerosene, like I said. And unfortunately, a lot of that stuff tastes like kerosene to me.
Really?
Like paint
Okay.
thinner.
Okay.
And that may be maybe my own particular
I don't know
taste.
where you've been drinking. I mean, I'm concerned for you
No, it's
that
fine.
you've been going to the wrong places.
I may have been. But maybe it's a specific thing that I have in my own, taste buds, my profile, whatever, that says I do not like this flavor in there. I'm not so drawn to the piney thing. And I know that that's kind of some of what guys like.
Sure. I mean, that's what fueled the early.
Yeah. Right.
When I think back
Sort
to
of the early enthusiasm. Yeah. Right.
Sure,
Yeah.
but I mean also the early beers. I mean, when you think about Sierra Nevada, or you even go back to New Albion, the very first microbrewery, which coincidentally both used old dairy equipment to fabricate their brewing equipment. I mean, it was that piney grapefruit that
Right.
that.
I'm
led the
okay
brews.
with the grapefruit thing.
Sure.
That's all right.
All right.
Yeah.
So just
and I know
dial
a lot
down
of
on
that's in the hops, but it's
Yeah.
like I've gotten to where my hazy has a slight blueberry fragrance to it, and a little bit of a blueberry element to it, which is really fun. I mean, and that's really been popular. That one took off.
the blue hazy.
Yeah.
Which uses mosaic, which some of those early ones had blueberry undertones to it as well.
Yeah.
So, are there more on the horizon? Like, how does it? Yeah.
Well, we got a double IPA coming out now.
Okay.
A couple of weeks, called Calico Moonlight.
Okay.
I like that. I fell on this theme. All the stuff is based on the land, right? So the culture and the history of the local history of where I am.
Okay.
So there was a movement called the Calico Indians, which was also led to the what they called the anti-rent wars, and it was in 1845. There was one guy who died. He was a policeman, an undersheriff, they called him, Osmond Steele. And he's famous for saying, lead will never pierce steel. And he got shot the next day. So it's like the sort of thing you just, karmically, you just don't think you should talk that way about
probably
anything.
not.
Right.
Yeah.
But So that's the lore that sort of feeds that particular brand, that particular flavor, rather. This movement that was kind of a pioneering movement. The guys that stood up for their rights to, like, hey, wait a minute, I farmed this land, I'm entitled to do it, and you can't, like, run us off this land because some guy forgot to pay his taxes. That's what it came down to.
Yeah.
And what was funny was the revolution in America led to a decision that the Congress made after a while, that they'd let people who were given tracts of land by the kings of Holland and of England to keep them. They could keep their tracts. They were giant, thousands and thousands of acres. But what happened was they allowed people to farm the land for rent.
Okay.
One of the guys stopped asking for rent. A guy they called the Good Patroon.
Mm-hmm.
He died, and his heirs owed the government a lot of money. So the solution they came up with was, we'll let the sheriff's men go and seize the property of the people that were farming the land and sell it.
Okay.
And so just ruin them.
Yeah.
And so there was a movement to stop that, and that's what they called themselves. They dressed in calico. And the way this sort of doubles back on itself in terms of the legacy of the story is that India Pale Ale, that was increased in hop strength, whatever, on its way to England, on its way to India, to give beer to the troops from England during that, imperialist push from London.
I'm going to send you a good book that Pete Brown wrote about all of that. But yes,
cool.
That's, yeah.
Anyway, at the same time, a material called calico was shipped from India to the United States, and most of the farmers' wives were wearing it and using it for bonnets and for aprons and for around the house.
Okay.
And so they designed costumes for themselves that were made of calico that were quite frightening to scare the constables, to scare the sheriff's men. It's pretty it's pretty like Robin Hood and stuff.
Yeah.
But they called themselves Calico Indians. So rather than be politically incorrect, I called them Calico Man.
Sure.
And Calico Man IPA is the first IPA we did.
There's a certain amount of nostalgia that immediately comes, or a certain amount of, I don't know, patriotism, sense of place by having the word American in the beer.
Yeah.
And certainly breweries have used imagery, have in the past, but putting it in the name, I imagine, was a conscious choice.
Absolutely. Well, my daughter's name is Faith. For a lot of reasons, my wife and I had some difficulty having a child at first, and we landed on the name Faith because it's a powerful name. Hope is okay,
sure,
but it's more passive. So everybody has hope. There's always hope. Blah blah blah.
Hopes and
so
prayers.
It's sort of it springs eternal. So I just thought, well, and we read some stuff by this fellow Emmett Fox, who's a metaphysical writer from the 1920s, who actually was responsible for writing some of the Big Book. But he was a really interesting fellow.
Yeah.
So the word faith, he does a whole piece, like an essay on faith versus hope, and how faith is a conscious choice, an active choice, a commitment to something. And we thought that's what we want to go with. So our first child is named Faith. After that, my own love of America, the United States of America, my sort of patriotism that actually is a sort of living, breathing thing in me. The two most important days in my family's history were always Christmas and 4th of July.
Sure.
That was it. And my grandmother was a big flag-waving American. My granddad served at Guadalcanal. These were, people that lived it, that paid the price for loving their country. And so faith in America is something I think I want to project to people. And, some don't. Some, okay, fine. Well, you don't have to drink the beer.
Yeah.
It's okay. But I love America, and I think the faith in America and the American way and the things that actually made us great will continue to make us great. I don't think it's the darkest days for America. I just think it's a little confusing patch.
There have been breweries that have waded into political speak to candidates, et cetera, and on the surface, your brand isn't doing that. But for those brewers who have in the past, there's always a flood of comments on the social media of, keep your politics out of my beer, or, regardless of which side people are on. Yeah.
Right,
Do you get any of that?
I haven't, but
Okay.
I mean, I don't know why. No matter what you think about America, to believe that America is a good idea is not hard for either side.
Sure.
You know, it's still a good concept. I do think, maybe we've fallen short. I get that, but nobody's aimed any higher than the United States of America.
Sure.
And so I'm a flag waving guy, and spots and all, I look at us and think, this is still a great place to be. So.
And beer is that quintessential, I think, still American beverage.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
I do too. I mean, people talk about it. They go, "Oh, hard seltzer's where it's at." I'm not chasing any of this crap. I make beer. One of my distributors talked to me at one point. We had a shouting match. He said, "Let me tell you something about the non-alcoholic business." I said, "Wait a minute. I need to refresh your memory on this thing.
Yeah.
I'm not in the non-alcoholic business.
Right.
I'm in the alcohol business. I sell beer."
Yeah.
So he was like, "Yeah, right, all right." We
Sort of a
became
tough
great
impasse.
friends
Okay,
after this
good.
sort of battle. It was fantastic. And so he's been one of my most ardent supporters now.
That's nice.
Yeah.
It's nice to have a distributor on your side, as
Yeah.
a lot of brewers can't relate
It's rare.
to. So, yeah.
I mean, the
I wish you recognized that.
The distributor thing is a very interesting dynamic, because they say they have salesmen, but I've never seen a salesman walk into a bar and try to sell beer. So I don't know what's going on. They might show up and say, "I'm a rep from this or that," and a bartender goes, "Yeah, I like this one. Okay, give me one of those." Or they just say, "Well, why don't you just email us and we'll get the order filled." So I'm not sure exactly what that position means in a beer company anymore, but it's okay.
More with Kelsey Grammer in a moment, but first, this episode is brought to you by Athletic Brewing Company, America's leading non-alcoholic craft brewer. Give dry a try this January with Athletic Brewing's Near Beers. New Athletic customers can receive 20% off of their first order of 2 6-packs or more when they visit athleticbrewing.com and use code AAB20 at checkout by March 31st, 2023. And for additional beer podcasts, search All About Beer on your podcast platform of choice and listen to Brewer to Brewer, Beer Travelers, and the All About Beer podcast. And now, back to my conversation with Kelsey Grammer of Faith American Ales. I live in a small town that you're going to visit later on tonight. And at drop-off this morning, because it's a small town, 2 of the parents, as I'm dropping off my 5.5-year-old, say, "Are you going to the Kelsey Grammer thing tonight?"
Oh, no kidding. Oh, cool.
Because I'm the beer guy in town.
Oh, I got it. Okay,
because
yeah.
of my job
I'm
and
touching,
everything.
yeah.
So yes, everybody. I meet other parents on the playground. Like,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, you're the beer guy." And it's like, well, I write about it and I talk
pretty good.
about it. But there's a small town buzz right now that you are going to be at Haley's, our Irish bar in
Right.
town tonight. And I went back and looked, and you do quite a few of these events with picking local small town bars.
It's my beer, my experience, my love of the bar experience.
Sure.
And I think my face may get people in the tent. The fact that I'm going to show up and do things, and I've actually landed on my feet in terms of a kind of profile and some success, and that opens the door for the beer. And the experience is always, we all sat and had a beer together and we liked it.
Yeah.
And as long as they like the beer, then hopefully they'll go buy it. But that's the experience I want people to have. I want them to understand this is about a family, about the love of beer, about the love of enjoying people's company. There's nothing else really I'm selling except the fact that you can have an experience where people get together and enjoy camaraderie and a little bit of conversation, watch a ball game together, watch an event together, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Or just sit and have a nice little evening.
There's you mentioned, they say they have salesmen, but they're not out there. You are your own best salesman.
So I'd say I sell my beer.
Yeah.
No, I mean, most of the relationships I have in terms of distributors are, so if I get an account, you will deliver the beer?
Yeah.
And they say, yeah, we'll deliver the beer.
Yeah. Great.
It's okay. That's where we're at.
Yeah, you're not jumping on trucks just yet.
Sort of. No. There's one piece in New Jersey I might actually drive my own truck down to, but I'm working on it.
What is it like at these bar events? Because I know you've not called this a celebrity brand, I read an article where you said if you do a celebrity brand, you do a sherry. But there's something to be said for the interaction. And what I'm struck by when I look at social media posts about your visits is there's no VIP line, there's no handlers. I mean, you just walked into this thing, by yourself, which is weirdly trusting of you, by the way. But
it's only because I'm weirdly trusting of people. I mean, that's how I love people.
Faith, yeah,
that's it, and that's where we're coming from.
But is there at these things, because when people think of celebrity, they're going to think of sort of closed off. They're going to maybe think of rarefied air, maybe, as it were.
Right.
I
want to dispel that theory.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want anybody thinking I'm somehow distant from the beer. I am the beer. It's something I love. I put my heart into it. I've put my sort of creativity into it. So it's a reflection on me personally. So I don't want to mess it up or alienate anybody by thinking, oh well, some celebrity hoo-ha, whatever.
Because I imagine people can confuse the art from the artist sometimes. Mm-hmm. I imagine that people associate you with wine.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, people have asked why didn't I do a wine.
Sure.
Well, actually, it's because you can't grow a grape on my property either.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can't grow hops, you can't grow grapes.
Yes.
So that's clearly the issue.
Yeah.
I like the everyman quality of it being a beer as well, though. I don't want to be an effete sort of like what was it? A rarefied
sure.
Creator of something to imbibe. I like beer because I didn't know I liked beer this much, but I liked it when I was a boy, when I was a young man, when I was working hard. Having a beer was the greatest thing I could do. It reminds me of hard work. I mean, one of my slogans in my head has always been sort of the land, the work, the beer. There's a combination of effort that goes into the beer that actually relates to a person working with their hands.
Yeah.
And I like that about it. And I like the sort of rogue energy of it, this kind of like maverick thing that is sort of American as well. And all these guys that are out, up to half of them that are developing beers and doing the craft business, maybe they hate America, maybe they love America, I don't know, but they're doing what Americans do.
Sure.
They're making something happen because they decided they wanted to do it, and they're doing it themselves.
I don't know if I've ever heard a brewery, just to throw it out there, I don't know if I've ever heard a brewery say that they hate America. I wonder if there is if you've been able to help bring people to the beer side. Because I imagine people come out because of who you are, and they're curious, and they might say, oh, I'm not a beer drinker, but they're going to try it because
I get a lot of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mostly that comes from, oh, God, you have to be so careful about the things you say these days, but mostly the women that come to the bar say, I don't really like beer. And I say, well, you know what? Try this one. And the Blue Hazy, has been off the hook for... Mostly the ladies seem to really like that one.
Okay.
That's it's drinkable. It is an IPA, but it's with that little lace of fruit in there. It really eliminates that bite that some guys crave. But
sure,
it makes it really drinkable, and that makes me very happy. It's my wife's favorite beer.
Yeah. I've seen some of the burliest guys that I know down hazy IPAs by the
it's
gallon
pretty popular.
full. It has been a leveler, and I think in a lot of ways to bring people that particular style to bring people.
I think
around.
so too. And of course, it's not particularly popular on the West Coast, and that's why I have the other beer. But I've enjoyed the hazy.
Are there correlations between the theater, which I know you've studied, you've been on major stages, you've played well-known characters on stages, being out with people? There's like a studio audience for television. Mm-hmm. There's the theater where you're on stage, and then you're in these situations where it's an immersive experience.
Right.
Are there correlations between?
It's a good question. It does make sense. I mean, that sounds like something I like to do. I like to interact with people. And the most interactive art form is theater. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, performance art theater maybe, but that's where it lives. If you're a sort of energy junkie, it's the theater that does it.
Yeah.
And so there's some. I would say that the selling the beer relates to that for me.
I'm not asking you to speak for all of Hollywood. I wouldn't do that. But a pet peeve of mine has been for a very, very long time that in certain medias, wine gets a lot of respect. You know, it is that fancy, okay, we're having a fancy glass, we're at a fancy restaurant. Whiskey shows up in Mad Men as sort of the cool thing. And then anytime beer is on the screen, or most times, it is the buffoonery that comes along with it.
Yeah, I guess maybe that is something possible.
Can that be changed?
I mean, the West Coast has this big we all on a winery kind of thing. I mean, there is that energy, I suppose. I think the art of making beer is very, very. It's a high end art. I mean, and there's also something really lovely about it. You don't have to hurt anybody to make beer. You don't get listeria. Nothing goes awful. You can't poison yourself with it. You can serve a bad beer, and I mean, honestly, most of the beer I drink, I think it's pretty bad beer. But I've learned to love.
You're going to the wrong
I've learned
places.
to love mine.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I got to say that my pal. I was not a beer drinker.
Right.
I wasn't a wine drinker either. I was just I like a martini, and that's sort of it. But now I've learned to I've really opened up to this beer thing, and I really enjoy it now. But and maybe that's why I've acquired more of a taste for some of the other IPAs, the heavier IPAs. But I'm still a little bit dubious about the amount of alcohol in them. So I mean, I've got the Blue Haze is 6.0 ABV. The ale's a 4.5. The Calico Man's a 6.9. The new one's going to be 8.9.
All right, yeah, that's significant.
That's a significant up. And the next manifestation of that will be what I think we're going to call it Calico Mayhem, and really go ahead and just punch.
Just own it.
Punch a hole in the envelope,
and
go for it and see. I'm sure some guys with beards down to their navel will actually love that beer.
Mindful of your time, last question here then. Are you familiar with the show The Good Place?
I
Kristen
am.
Bell, Ted Danson.
Of course. Yeah, because I did a film with Kristen.
Okay.
Yeah.
There is there's a concept introduced in the last season of the show of a green door. Mm-hmm. And I've been asking this question on the show for the last couple of years now. The green door, once you open it and walk through, you can be anywhere, any place, any time. If there was such a door on our plane of existence and this conversation ended and you could walk through and be at any pub or any brewery anywhere in the world, where would you want to go? Who would you want to be with? And what would you like to be drinking?
It's my property in upstate New York.
It's fairly easy.
I love it so much. It's just fantastic. So that's I guess what I try to convey in the beer is this love of the land up there and this recreation that you get there, this beauty, it's unvarnished beauty. It is my garden. It's my Garden of Eden, and my wife, my kids. That's it. Well, in the words of Cole Porter, I'll say every time we say goodbye, I die a little. There you go. Every time we say goodbye. And the words of Sideshow Bob. That's where I was going with it. Yeah. That's what I was raised on, and that's there it is. Yeah, right. I could not resist. I die a little. My colleague Don Tess just died a little hearing you do that. So thank you for lovely. That. Thank you for sitting down. Thank you for doing this. Yeah, pleasure. Thank you. Don Tess, by the way, co-hosts the All About Beer podcast with M. Souter. New episodes are available every other Thursday. Just search All About Beer on your podcast platform of choice. And during the show, I mentioned a book by Pete Brown that gets into the true history of IPA. It's called Hops and Glory. Get it and read it. The IPA book by Mitch Steele is also worth a read for similar reasons. And if you're into beer and food, the Craft Brewery Cookbook is available where fine books are sold. A reminder to go visit allaboutbeer.com. There you can check out the podcast page, the merch page, and you can read great new content as well as the archives going back to 1979. Questions, comments, concerns, guest suggestions, let me know by emailing. It's John Hall, JOHNHOLL, at allaboutbeer.com, or you can tell me on Twitter at John_Hall. You can follow All About Beer on social media at All About Beer. And if you're interested in supporting journalism in the beer space, email us at info@allaboutbeer.com or visit patreon.com/allaboutbeer. Speaking of that, today's episode was sponsored by Athletic Brewing Company, America's leading non-alcoholic craft brewer.
Now you can drink great tasting brews all month long without feeling hungover. Whether you're giving dry a try for a few days or for the whole month of January, Athletic Brewing's Near Beer have you covered. New Athletic customers can receive 20% off of their first order of 2 6-packs or more when they visit athleticbrewing.com and use the code AAB20 at checkout by March 31st, 2023. Again, you can learn about advertising by emailing us at info@allaboutbeer.com. Don't forget, All About Beer has podcasts now. Go search and subscribe on your platform of choice. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday, and the BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. As for this show, Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Hall. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'll be back again to drink beer and to think beer.